Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Jnanavarthini DPDPS weekly knowledge session. Today, we have an exciting session. In continuation with our discussions and analysis on DPDPA, today we have Mr. Ramesh Venkataraman presenting a comparison of DPDPA and GDPR. Ramesh does not need an introduction in this forum. He is FDPPA's director and a well-known trainer for the FDPPA programs. Ramesh has over 30 years experience in the software and systems engineering field across several organizations, including Siemens, Cognizant, Symphony Teleca, and Aptec. He is currently portfolio manager QMS and ISMS in Calsays, India. Looking forward to an insightful and a very interactive session. Over to you, Ramesh.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Manju. Very warm welcome to all of you. Thank you very much for joining. What I am planning to do is that I'm talking about the Indian law or GDPR. As you and me know, it's an ocean. So my assumption at this stage that all of us know both the laws, right? However, having said that, while I'm trying to give you the mapping, let's say between GDPR and some of the key areas, right, of Indian law, I will touch upon back the new law for us to get hold of what is this, how it is getting mapped to the Digital Personal Data Protection Act of India, 2023. All right, maybe that another 2-3 minutes, I'll be just talking about giving you the overall structure of the current law.
Yeah, voice.
Why? Hello? Yeah. This is a Digital Personal Data Protection Act. Very recent, exactly a month old probably, 13th of August or 11th of August. And we had multiple discussions in multiple forums about this law, intricacies, expectations, etc. Navi sir was leading it from the front. So if you look at, it has been beautifully given like chapters 1 to 3, where it talks about the preliminary aspects are getting covered. Definitions, almost around 28 plus definitions, setting the context for this law, right? Some of the concepts are new, unique to this law, as we and me know. I will touch upon it. And applicability, as usual, being set at the chapter 1. The obligations of data fiduciary, this is where that comparison or the mapping between the Indian law and GDPR starts. As we all know, this is the new terminology per se, right? Which coined by the way back in 2018 of our Justice B.S. Krishna's draft report. We don't call it as a data controller. We call them as data fiduciary. As far as my knowledge goes, almost all the laws, I think this is also a fairly new area. Now, if you look at it in the obligations, clearly it's being given grounds for processing the personal data, on what basis the data fiduciary would be able to process my data, giving a proper notice to me, taking a consent. Be with me. Lots and lots of discussions are happening. The consent plays a vital role in this law. It's a disadvantage also. It's an advantage also. Advantage, there is no risk for the data fiduciary. Disadvantage in establishing the process to system to train the people and creating the awareness on both the sides. Wow. Because the onus on ensuring that the consent has been taken from the data principal lies with the data controller or data fiduciary, not even the data processor. Of course, you might be putting a valid contract to cover this aspect. However, law is very clear. Data fiduciary is responsible. And certain legitimate uses they had beautifully identified in case
you are not audible.
Sorry. Hello?
Yeah,
Hello?
yeah, it's audible now. No,
Sorry,
you are not audible for a moment.
Yeah, sorry. Certain legitimate uses. Quite interesting, this law. Maybe again, we had a recital concept at GDPR, right? Recitals are nothing but the guidelines on how to interpret that particular article. The same way in this law, it's like a recital, explanation, examples beautifully coming as part of the law itself with a case study they had given. So quite interesting. So where to use, what kind of legitimate uses, and general obligations of the data fiduciary, what he supposed to take care of it. Basically, mainly, as you and me know, the rights of the data subjects is the first thing, and ensuring that that law is being implemented in totality, and ensuring that safeguards are provided, etc., etc. Additionally, if you look at that bullet 9, processing of handling the data of children, quite interesting, right? Children, they have said that the age is 18. However, that provisions have been given that if government for any reason wanted to reduce the age of a children for a particular processing or a data fiduciary, they have the provision. So handling that children's data, especially today being in a digital world, right? Obviously, they need to have a parental consent to access something. The responsibility, the onus is going to be back on the data fiduciary. The last, quite interesting, additional obligations of a new class of data fiduciary called a significant data fiduciary. And they had given certain criteria that who would be called as a data fiduciary, significant data fiduciary. And additional obligations in terms of if you are a significant data fiduciary, that means obviously you are going to handle some kind of sensitive personal data, even though that law doesn't prescribe anything called sensitive personal data. But obviously, different kind of data where processing that particular data, whether it is the children's data or that specific data, is going to, what is the risk to the data principle, the second bullet I'm referring to, right? I will talk about it, don't worry. So, because it's very sensitive, there are certain additional obligations need to be taken care by the significant data fiduciary. One, quickly having a data protection officer. Two, conducting the data protection impact assessments. Three, going for a regular planned audits. Four, data audits to be performed by an independent auditor. These are all additional obligations we need to be aware of. Quite interestingly, look at this. Again, this is unique in our law. No law, as far as I know, has come in here. Rights of the data principle, rights of the data subject, we heard about it. This is the first time. Duties for you and me also has been given beautifully. Wow, probably not to misuse, right? And if you are going to misuse it, you are going to be fined also, right? Up to 10,000, etc. Now, here, if you look at some of the things, quite interesting. It's a very, very minimal rights has been given, not like GDPR. I will compare it. Interestingly, it talks about I have a right to access of my own data, which is available with my data fiduciary. Right to correct, right to erase, delete, I have an option. Right of grievance redressal, right? Whenever I have a problem, I would be able to initiate a discussion with the data protection officer or data protection board in case if they are not doing it. And these two are where I have put it in bold. Quite interesting. Right to nominate. Again, in my opinion, it's unique. I was looking at this morning also. Is there anything available like this equivalent? Right? Right to nominate. As a data principal, I have the provision to nominate somebody. That somebody would be able to take care of my aspects even after my, death, etc. Duties of the data principal, an unique concept, which is had come in here, and obviously some exemptions, etc. Now, if you look at it, in this the meat, starting from the definition 2, you and me need to have a clear idea about exemptions, right? This is the meat or the crux here. Moving further, the Data Protection Authority, earlier what we call, here we are calling it as a Data Protection Board, DPB, and obviously starting from sections 18 subtitles talking about how to establish the board. This is the government. Now, what you and me need to be aware of, at least where we can approach the data protection board in case of any kind of grievances, if I have any. Obviously, some of the things are totally fairly not yet being part of that law. Very quickly to tell you, all these things, notifications are going to be coming once when the law is going to be rolled out. If you look at the section 2 of the chapter 2 of your document, beautifully it says, it shall come into force for such date as the central government may by notification in the official gazette, appoint, and different dates may be appointed for different provisions of this act. So it may not come in bulk. There were some discussions I was seeing it here and there. I am very clear, like how GDPR had given a 2 years transition period. Obviously, country like India, we will be provided with that kind of transition period, in my opinion. Otherwise, it would be impossible to set up a system, to set up a process, to set up a policy, to train the people on both the sides, right? And I don't think we need to worry about other things because these are administrative and what powers and functions of the procedure to be followed. And this is quite interesting. Appeal and alternate dispute resolution, right? How to appeal to the appellate tribunal, voluntary undertaking, etc. Penalties, quite interesting for you and me to be aware of. Anyway, we have a separate section. So that's why I put here, please be aware of certain concepts of expectations or the ingredients of Data Protection Board of India. Other things we can, at this point, we don't have to worry about it. Miscellaneous, etc., etc. This is again power to make rules for the central government and so on, right? We need not worry about it. What is quite interesting is that schedule, which has come as a kind of, which addresses the breach of provisions. It's like, in my understanding, it's like a HIPAA penalty, multi-layered penalty, not, at least in GDPR, we had only 4% or 2%, 20 million to etc. Simple, right? Here it is different. And this schedule is beautifully talking about this. I will cover it when I'm talking about penalty. With this brief introduction, because I'm not going to get into the law, otherwise our focus today, my interest is to run through the kind of how does it map. There were some kind of discussions. Oh, it is a kind of diluted, it is a kind of lightweight, etc. At least if you ask me, my interpretation at this stage, hearing, reading, going through, I don't think. Obviously, it would get strengthened further in the coming days. So first I had in my mind that straight away, don't try to compare it with the GDPR. Let's not do that. It's a new law and our own law, and we need to really interpret it, and it's going to get strengthened, the new notifications, etc. Let's look at it. What I had put on that left-hand side, key points, some of the important concepts I had tried to map it, right? It may be, maybe 70, 80% I would have covered. Now we are all very clear with the kind of roles, what has been offered, right? Because we are all almost, each one of us in the call are very familiar with, as I said, starting from data subject or data controller, data processor, joint controller who determines the purpose jointly and the method, data protection officer, supervisory authorities for each EU member state, SA is what we call supervisory authority or data protection authorities, and then EU representative, where if you do not have a kind of, a natural or a legal person established in the EU who designated by the data controller processor in writing to the board represents them. That's all, EU representative. Now, if I look at mine, DPDPA, we starts with the data principle, that is you and me. Quite interestingly, we are talking about that the data principle includes a child. The moment you bring in a child, age of 18 has been identified. So if it is less than 18, they are all being called as child. Then parental consent or a lawful guardian consent is required. So now we need to have a verifiable, how to verify whether he is a child, first of all, how to verify whether he is a lawful guardian. All these things, new things are coming up. Second, a person with a disability also has been identified as a data principle. That means, physically, mentally. So they are also getting covered as a data principle. So somebody else can act on their behalf as a guardian for them. Again, you need to have a formal approval and etc. Data fiduciary, nothing but the data controller who alone or in conjunction with somebody identifying, determining the purpose for processing my data. Processing is a very big definition, right? Everything is getting covered, whether it is a collection, whether it is storage, whether it is manipulation, whether it is transmission, whether it is archival, etc. Disposal even, right? The important here is a significant data fiduciary, a data fiduciary or class of data fiduciaries would be identified as significant data fiduciary. And as I said earlier, they come with their own obligations need to cover. We will talk about it. Then we have a board, Data Protection Board of India, and we have a consent manager, where I have marked it here. If you see, right, consent manager and data auditor, unique concept of ours. Who is a consent manager? An organization, a person going to be registered with the board, obviously. That means, again, it's going to be a process. It's going to be a big opportunity for some of the organizations. Who is going to be a single point of contact, SPOC, for the data principal? For what? To give, manage, review, withdraw the consent through an accessibility. I think we discussed it in one of our FDPPA forums. It's like a chartered accountants we have, right? Today I get an ITR notification. I do not know. So I request my CA to look into, right? And then he files on my own, on my behalf. Consent manager, but they need to be registered. Data auditor, an unique concept. As I said, 140 plus laws, at least I have not seen. Last week, quite interestingly, I saw, I'm sure people like Adupu, others might have seen it. As part of the California, earlier CCPA, right? Now it is CPRA, California Personal Regulation Act or whatever, CPRA, which talks about two important aspects: performing a cyber security audit, not audit, data audit, cyber security audit, and the risk assessment at regular intervals by an independent body. Recent updation. So I was a little bit happy. They are not talking about data audit. They are talking about cyber security audit and risk assessment. So we can be very happy, pride about that. We are the first law in this arena we are talking about. An independent data auditor, obviously lots of people will be getting a kind of opportunity, who shall evaluate the compliance of, SDF stands for significant data fiduciary. Look at it, not for every data fiduciary, significant data fiduciary, because they are handling volumes of data, sensitivity of the data, and so on. And undertake the following other measures, namely conducting a regular audit, such other measures which are going to be consistent with the provision of this act, which might be prescribed at a later point of time. So interestingly, we are talking about consent manager as the unique. We are talking about data auditor as the unique, as important roles when compared to GDPR. You can compare this with any law, I'm sure. When we talk about general principles, GDPR really sets the base beautifully. 7 principles, right? We all know. For which you are collecting the data, purpose need to be there. You need to process the data, very minimal as much as possible, data minimization. Ownership on the data controller to maintain the accuracy of the data up to date, providing the provision, right? Storage limitation, integrity, confidentiality, and accountability, the final one. Wherein in Indian law, even though we do not have like this, it's being handled through 2 important aspects: lawful basis and purpose-oriented consent. Consent is going to play a very heavy role. Yeah, beautiful, right? Now I'll just take you through. Wherever I had put here, I'm trying to map the provisions of the Act also. So Chapter 2, Section 4, wherein we talk about grounds for processing the personal data, it clearly says that you need to have a consent. Now I will take you a little bit on the consent part and legal basis, right? Look at it. For a specified purpose, the data principal has given voluntarily, like, I call up Pizza Hut and I'm ordering that. Now, this is a voluntary. Be with me. Pizza Hut cannot take my phone number and then call me for any kind of marketing or etc. tomorrow, because the consent is only for that purpose. So if they want, they need to have a new purpose, I need to give a new consent. That's an understanding. right? Second, for employment purpose, obviously these are all the legal basis which somebody can process the data without a formal consent. For responding to the vital part, medical emergency, for compliance with any court order, judgment, etc., or any state nation related with respect to security or so. Yeah. So the DPDPA is beautifully, sorry, 1 minute. General consent, general principles we are talking about. The lawful purpose means any purpose which is not expressly forbidden by the law. This note is part of our act. So it's very clear. If any of the law has not forbidden, then it is a lawful basis. We will be able to process it. Personal data definition, I don't see any big difference. Any PII, any data which directly or indirectly relating to an identified or identifiable. Here we are talking about indirect identifiers. Here that law is talking about any data about an individual who is identifiable by or in relation to such data, right? He or she. Then it is a personal data of that person. In GDPR, we have a special categories of data, right? A definition called special categories of data, wherein the sensitive data like health related, biometric, finance related, ethnic origin, political opinions, religious, philosophical beliefs, etc. Quite interesting. In India law, no such classification. Simple. It is a personal data. However, as we discussed, because we are talking about there is going to be a separate class of data fiduciaries called significant data fiduciaries, and look at that first bullet as part of it, what they are saying, volume and sensitivity of the personal data. So obviously the regulation, that notification when it's going to come, it will have this kind of data as a special categories or sensitive data like biometric, health data or finance related data. Right now it is not there, but this is how I'm interpreting that we might be having. And this is where that because this significant data fiduciaries are handling this kind of sensitive data and risk to the data principles or data subjects, then that's why DPO is mandated, DPIA is mandated, audits are mandated, etc. Yeah. Anonymized data, as we all know, not part of the scope of our GDPR, and we strongly say, right, in practice, as a best practice, anonymization is the best way. It's a high standard to meet. No risk to the data fiduciary or a data controller. Because as of now, at least nobody had proven it, that whether it can be retraced back to the PII. In our act, there is no mention about anonymized data at this point of time, only the digital personal data. Conditions for processing the sensitive data, there are 10 particular lawful basis of handling the sensitive data. Obviously, the first one from the GDPR perspective is to have an explicit consent, and or otherwise, you have a different kind of categories, what they had said, whether it is for the life protection and vital interest, you may be using their sensitive personal data, medical purpose, archiving scientific or historical research purpose, they will be able to use the data, or substantial public interest in health, like a COVID kind of situation, what we talked about, they might be using the data. Wherein here, as of now, there is no sensitive classification of sensitive data. However, as we discussed, that significant data fiduciary situation might bring in this, right? Additional obligations for the significant data fiduciary. Now, this I wanted to really show as part of the law. Who is going to be grouped under significant data fiduciary? Volume and sensitivity of the data, what they handle. Risk to the data principles, how the impact it's going to be. Obviously, the healthcare data is very, very important, right? Somebody can, starting from HIPAA to etc., they talk about whether that particular data somebody is handling, where it's going to create kind of impact on India's integrity, sovereignty, or threats to electoral democracy, like our famous Facebook case related, right? Especially the social medias, the way they handle the data and then, come out with their kind of own interpretations. Maybe those kind of organizations would be classified as significant data fiduciary. Appointment of a representative in GDPR, there is a provision to have an EU representative where the data controllers or data processors are not established in the EU. Then they can say that this guy is my representative, where he will handle all the kind of, what they have to do with respect to handling the board or handling the data subject, etc. Wherein our act, we need to have, as part of the significant data fiduciary obligation, we need to have a data protection officer, not only having them, they need to be based out of India. So maybe like Singapore law, where it talks about that they need to have their email IDs to their contact numbers to be made available on their privacy policy or website, etc., would be the kind of regulations we will be having it. Appointment of DPO is mandated in GDPR in 3 important cases, namely, if the processing of the personal data is done by a public authority, like your BBMP kind of stuff we are talking about, except for the courts, etc., they have been taken out. The regular and systematic monitoring of data subjects on a large scale, like a mall, correct? Or airport, etc. Or the third one is the large scale processing of sensitive data, special categories of data. Then they need to have a DPO. And we also talked about in a very big way, right? The qualifications, the competences of the DPO, because he or she going to be the single point of contact, both internally and externally. And they need to have a full-fledged knowledge on, the law as applicable, etc. Wherein the same thing is almost the same here. It is necessary for significant data fiduciaries mandated. They need to be based out of India. They are the single point responsible for taking care of the grievance redressal, and they are individual responsible directly reporting to the board of directors or similar apex body of your significant data fiduciary. And DPO need to have whatever the skills we talked about, right? And this is mandated. Appointment of data processors, we discussed it in GDPR that they need to be a valid contract unless and until they cannot be, because it's like a written instructions they are going to give it to the data processor. Liability, responsibility, whatever they need to handle is going to be part of the contract, which Article 28 talks about it. Same kind of requirement over here. Interestingly, if you are aware of GDPR, like controller obligations, we also used to talk about processor organizations. In fact, if there is a data breach, they need to report quickly within the time frame too, right? Interestingly, in our law, no obligations has been identified for data processors. Now, who is the responsible then? Our data fiduciary. So if your organization is executing a background verification check and you have an outsourced vendor, please go ahead. But be with me, if there is a data breach, you as a data fiduciary are going to be in trouble. And hence, probably starting from identifying a vendor in terms of due diligence, taking care of whether they have the required skills, they have the technical safeguards to be provided, and so on. So they need to be taken care through the contract. Yeah, we need to be very, very careful. They made it very clear. This is what I was looking for. Likely to be contractually flowed down by the data fiduciaries or to the significant data fiduciaries as applicable. So your contract need to be very, very careful. Bring out, yeah. Consent. In GDPR, we had talked about consent need to be freely given. It needs to be specific for that purpose. It needs to be informed, that privacy notice, right? We need to be very, very clear. Must be granted by an unambiguous and affirmative action, right? Generally, provision of the service cannot be made conditional on obtaining the consent for processing that's not necessary for the service. We talked about it. Same here. Sorry. The consent given by the data principal shall be free, specific, informed, unconditional. You cannot say that, I will be able to provide the service only based on this. No. But obviously you cannot argue, right? When you're going to open an account in a bank saying that, no, I will not provide my PAN card. That is needed for the performance of the contract. Obviously you need to give. So we need to be careful. And the consent is the one a starting point. It acts as a kind of agreement to the processing of the personal data by the data fiduciary or significant data fiduciary. This is very important for the specified purpose and be limited to such personal data as necessary for such a specified purpose, right? If it is a new purpose, please take a new consent. So it's going to be a big, I was hearing in few of the webinars, right? When there is a question asked to somebody that, what do you feel that it's going to be a overkill? It's going to be a problem for the organizations. Everybody is talking about this consent mechanism is being, very crucial for the organizations to implement it. Now, we all know, right? Consent. We have as I said, that we have a consent manager concept, unique, a single point of contact to enable the data principal to give, manage, review. The consent manager must be accountable to whom? To me, to the data principal, and he should take care of my interests. He or she to be registered with the data protection board, and they are subject to technical, operational, financial, and other conditions which might be notified later. Because it's an organization going to be, right? They need to be consent to be managed through an accessible, transparent, and interoperable platform. Again, country like India, right? It's going to be quite exhaustive, quite demanding, right? And look at that kind of one privacy notice need to be made available in English or, right? The languages specified in the 8th schedule of the Constitution, they say 22 languages, even though they had put R. Now, many of the airports we have seen, right? For example, Sri Lanka, you go, Sinhalese is the first language, second English, third Tamil. Like Singapore, for example, I'm looking at probably privacy notices, etc., consent mechanisms are going to be in those kind of local languages, right? And the role, responsibility, obligations, etc., at this point, we do not have as part of the act, which might be coming out later. Handling the children's data, being looked at it very, very in a focused way. So if you're a data fiduciary, we need to be very careful. In fact, GDPR also has got that provision, as we know, 18 as the, 16. And some of the EU member countries, they have the provision to amend it to 13, let us say. And while providing certain electronic services directly to a child. In fact, we talked about this when we talked about California Consumer Privacy Act, right? 2021, the same kind of provisions. Some of the websites or gaming sites or porn sites, etc., need to be not made available. They should not be able to access, and you need to have a mechanism. Processing of the personal data of the children is pertinent to other GDPR requirements. Example, your notices must be tailored to explain to the children their language and etc. The same kind of here we are talking about. The age identified prescribed is 18 years. Less than 18 is your child. There is a provision, as I told earlier, the government of India can reduce that age for certain processing of data. And the data fiduciaries need to be really careful, right? Obtain the verifiable consent for a child is going to be really interesting. How do we, right? So we need to think about policy, procedure, system. And a person with a disability, that means somebody is going to represent lawful guardian. So you need to have a system. Data fiduciaries must avoid processing which is likely to create problem on well-being of the child. Probably a gaming site I could think of, or any other, sites we normally block from the children, right? I don't know whether in Tamil Nadu, especially last 3-6 months, so many people committing suicide because of this online rummy game or whatever. no tracking or behavioral monitoring of a child, or no targeting advertising directed on a children. Be careful. If you are a data fiduciary, we need to be careful. Exempted, some of the purposes will be later prescribed. Where processing is verifiably safe, government may specify the age, right? They might be able to, like there are some representations from the social media, especially Facebook kind of organizations, because their main customers are the kids, right? So might be. So now if you are able to prove that I'm able to have a proper system in terms of identifying their age, they might reduce it. It has got the authority to exempt certain data fiduciaries. We need to see that who are all going to be, right? But this is one quite interesting aspect here. And we talked about there are 4 important basic rights of the data subjects, along with the duties or data principle rather. When compared to GDPR, we know that right to access personal data must be provided. My data, I have the right to ask the data principal, data fiduciary or data controller. Same thing here. It's available and I can ask that person, right to access my own data, information about my personal data. A summary of the data, what I had given it to him, where all my data, personal data has been shared with which data fiduciary, who are all the data processors, and I have the right to ask for it. Any other information related to the personal data of the data principal and its processing, I have the right to ask. They should be able to provide, and the kind of time frame, etc., need to be emerging. Right to correction and erasure. Obviously, we have, this right is available even with the GDPR. I have entered while entering wrongly, and hence I need to have a provision to correct that data, modify the data, or if it is not needed for the purpose, probably I'm going to say, please delete the data. Now, the same is available here. Interestingly, now this is where, because there is no obligation of a data processor, we need to be careful. Background verification, how that data is going to be, what kind of system we are going to have process to ask that the data processor to delete my data. Data principals have the right to correction, completion, update the data, and erasure of their personal data. And with respect to the erasure, the data principals may submit. How to submit, that mechanism will be later given to us. On receipt of that, the data fiduciary must erase the personal data unless and until it is needed for another purpose, another law, right? And obviously, these all need to be documented in that organizations, okay? Otherwise, obviously, we are violating the principle. So data fiduciaries need to be careful. Right of grievance redressal. Here in GDPR 2, we know, right, the data subject can approach the DPO. In some cases, they can approach the supervisory authorities, right? They can raise a complaint, raise a kind of, if they find something, the data controller is not taking care of it or processor is not taking care of it. The same thing over here. The data principal shall have the right to use the grievance redressal mechanism provided by the data fiduciary or the consent manager. Look at it now. So the data fiduciary need to have a grievance redress mechanism, consent manager too. And I, like an incident management, I raise it within the time frame they need to come back. Otherwise, I will be probably going to that data protection board also, where this time period, etc., is going to be prescribed. Now, the data principal have the right to register a grievance with the data fiduciary or a consent manager, and they can also escalate the complaint to the board in case of lack of response or unsatisfactory response from the data fiduciary or the consent manager. All these things, if you are not going to implement it, that itself is a violation. As I said, right to nominate, as of now, as per my knowledge, I think ours is the only law which it talks about. shall have the right to nominate in such a manner as may be prescribed again to any other individual who shall, in the event of a death or incapacity, I fall sick, I am not, probably physically disabled, whatever, exercise the rights of the data principal in accordance with the provisions of the Act. Quite interesting part. How it is going to really be helpful or how it is going to get implemented, we need to see. Right of data portability, right? That is from one system, one vendor to another, one system to another. GDPR beautifully provides that kind of, like Vodafone to, let's say, Airtel. And the data subjects should be easy for them to move from one person to another person. In fact, in our system, we do not have any provision like this. Transparency requirements. Information must be provided in a transparent, intelligible, easily accessible form using a clear and plain language, right? At the time of collecting the data from me, I need to be educated, right? And we also said that for what you are collecting, etc. Where personal data is collected directly from the individual, notice must be provided at the time or before collecting the data. Where personal data is collected indirectly, that is from any, let's say, LinkedIn, I'm downloading a profile, or I'm just giving an example. Then, on the first instance, please go back to that data principal or data subject and have his or her consent. The same thing we are talking about. Notice should be made available. It needs to be transparent. It needs to be, etc. And it can be handled through the consent manager system also. They need to provide a notice here also, either during or before seeking the consent. For legacy data, a fresh privacy notice to be issued as soon as reasonably possible with the kind of information to tell them that, right, that these are all the data I had collected, this is the purpose, and etc. Notice, the privacy notice should be, as per the law, they had given this, what data we are collecting, for what purpose, how they can exercise the right to, in case if they wanted to withdraw their consent, and how to exercise the right of grievance redressal, how they can file a complaint, and the manner of complying with the board in case of any unsatisfactory response from them. And they need to be provided with the option, as we discussed, in English or the languages listed in the section Schedule 8 of Indian Constitution. The data fiduciary must be able to prove it is their responsibility, right? That the notice was issued, it was explained, and then we have got the consent from them. It is the responsibility of them. When we talk about authorities, here at the GDPR, we all know, right? National, at each European member state level, they have a supervised authorities or data protection authorities, and they have at the top level European Data Protection Board, which may issue, which takes care of, right, providing the guidances and making sure that the GDPR is implemented nicely within their territory. Here we are expecting that Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology would come out with the rules further. And now we are expecting, because many of the things in a summary level I'm trying to put, because right now we do not have the details about all these things. All these things have to come out. How to obtain a verifiable consent, accountability, obligations, registration of consent managers, how to do it, how to notify the board, data protection board, in case of any personal data breach, how to publish the business contact information of a data protection officer if I'm the significant data fiduciary, what is the mandatory things, how the data fiduciary must inform the data principal when the notice accompanying the request for the consent, etc. Quite interesting. All these things are going to come, right? And how the data principals can submit their request, the time frame within which the data fiduciaries need to go back to them. Like in GDPR, we say that 30 days, within 30 days, at least they should solve the problem, or they need to go back to them within 30 days saying that when they will get back, and maximum time period given was 90 days. The same kind of rules might emerge for us. Legal basis for processing the personal data. There are 6 lawful bases, starting with obviously the consent in GDPR, and then whether it is needed, that processing is needed as part of the contract BGV, as an example, legal obligation, court order, legitimate interest if they have, and vital interest in terms of medical emergency or public interest like, corona kind of situations. Here in our law, as I'm mentioning, consent is the main basis for processing the data. So you need to be very, very careful. Legitimate uses cover the other aspects, the same thing we talked about it, almost the same. Rights relating to profiling. Data subjects have a right not to be subject to solely automated decisions as part of GDPR, right to object, right? I can say I don't want to be part of that automated decisions. If it is a manual decisions, it's okay. I can allow them, right? Where such decisions are permitted, data subjects have the right to obtain the human intervention, right? And data controllers must also provide meaningful information about the logic of decisions. If they are using, let's say, a kind of algorithm, what is that? Because I need to know on what basis, because if the output of that algorithm is going to be taking a decision about me on any kind of, right? I need to be careful, and hence that provision. Here, consent-based profiling is feasible, though restrictions apply in case of handling the children's data. More we need a kind of input on this. Records of processing, there is a separate criteria, right? Less than 250 employees, you need not worry about it in GDPR, but otherwise they must maintain the detailed records of their processing activities, wherein in our case, it's not specifically mentioned. However, as a best practice, it would be necessary for compliance. If a significant data fiduciary has to go for a planned audit by an independent auditor at a regular point of interest against what that auditor is going to do, obviously you need to have the records, right? Even though it is not mentioned, this is an interpretation. But I'm sure in the first of the cases, if it's going to be the legal cases, all these things would emerge, right? That's how we have seen in any of the law. Data protection impact assessment. GDPR categorically stated that data controllers need to conduct the data protection impact assessment for high risk activities, including that 3 categories where the DPO is needed in our earlier discussion, right? If you are using a systematic and extensive profiling, if you are processing the sensitive data on a large scale, and if you are systematic monitoring of the publicly accessible area, right? BBMP kind of organizations where we use lots and lots of data, hospital sensitive data, malls having large kind of people. Here, it is necessary for significant data fiduciaries, main important ingredient. Privacy by design, explicitly it has been called out in our GDPR, right? Requirement to implement appropriate compliance processes. By default, only the personal data necessary for the purpose should be processed. Data minimization and personal data should not be publicly disclosed without an individual's positive reaction, right? You cannot assume. That's what GDPR talked about it. In fact, yesterday I was going through one of the case study. I think I have it. It's based on handling the children's data. I think it is in Google. While handling the children's data, one particular feature, they did not think about it properly, wherein by default, those data are being made available to the public, right? And those data are nothing but, let's say, the phone number and an email ID, which is a very, very important data. And hence that organization was fined. If I'm right, it is Google. So privacy by design plays a vital role, even though it is not mentioned in our act. But you and me agree, right? It should be needed definitely for the compliance. Of course, the law doesn't talk about it. What it says, provide a suitable technical organizational safeguards, full stop, right? TOMS, technical and organizational measures, what we are talking about. So we need to really have this. Information security, if I'm right, Article 32 beautifully talks about, right? Security of processing as part of the GDPR, where that confidentiality, integrity, availability comes into picture. What's IT security? what is physical security, what is personal data protection, which was covered as part of GDPR. Data controllers and data processors required to implement appropriate terms, technical and organizational measures. Here it's the same, right? The data fiduciaries are data processor, as I said, no specific obligations as per the law. And hence the onus is on the data fiduciary now, as we discussed about. Data localization requirements. Localization is not required in GDPR unless international data transfer requirements are not met. Here, no restrictions at present. In fact, cross-transfer border, what we say, nothing has been identified as on date. They might come out with like GDPR adequacy status or standard contractual clauses or binding corporate rules, etc. as applicable. But right now, countries to which restrictions may apply may be notified later. International data transfer, very, very stringent, very strong as part of the GDPR. Within, how they can transfer the data. One is adequacy status, or you need to have a binding corporate rule, or you need to have a standard contractual clauses, or you need to have a, all these things, wherein no restrictions at present as part of our law. Breach notification, very, very stringent within 72 hours, right? Obviously, they need to do a understanding that impact of that breach and what had gone wrong, etc. Even if they are not fully aware of, at least within 72 hours, they need to report, they need to go back with that initial assessments and so on, right? That's the expectation there. And here, how are we going to do? Here there is, it might be coming out at a later stage. However, we have, right, the 6 hours mandatory for certain reporting. Maybe that is the one. And the penalties, it's very simple, as I said, 20 million or 4% to 10 million or 2%, right? And individuals may bring claims in court of compensation mechanisms exist, wherein in India, we have a multi-layered penalty. And this is what that schedule is talking about it. It's the highest fine we are talking about, 250 crores. Failure of the data fiduciary to take the reasonable security safeguards, what we just talked about. Failure to notify the Data Protection Board of India or affected data principals, costing them 200 crores. Non-fulfillment of additional obligations as prescribed in the law for the handling of children's data. Non-fulfillment of additional obligations like DPO need to be there, data protection impact assessment need to be done, periodic audit needs to be carried out, data audit need to be performed by an independent data auditor for a data fiduciary. If you are not doing it, obviously you are going to be fined with 150. Non-compliance with the duties of the data principals, that is you and me. If you are raising a false grievance address system, or I am trying to impersonate somebody in any of the system, and if they catch you and me, right, 10,000 rupees. And breach of any other provision of this act or the rules made thereunder, maybe 50 crores and so on. So penalty is a multi-layered approach, like HIPAA, as I said. Social media intermediaries, GDPR is silent about it, wherein interpreting here with our law, maybe the significant data fiduciaries and regulations could be applied along with our ITA 2000 Act. Data Protection Authority, the primary function is to ensure the compliance in both the cases. Here we call them as Data Protection Board. Lots and lots of explanation, expectations, right? And what they have to do. Anyway, it's just in the very, very initial stages. We do not have yet a detailed one. And data audits, we talked about it. You need to, the significant data fiduciaries need to appoint an independent auditor to carry out that audit, who shall evaluate the compliance of the significance data fiduciary. The audits are to be conducted by an independent auditor in the form, manner, and procedure as prescribed by the authority, right? We have a establishment of a board which talks about this data audits. Demonstrating compliance with the respective legislations. There, we talked about data controller. In fact, they also have data processor obligations, right? Work hand in hand closely with the data controller, and establishment of data protection certification mechanisms. Of course, as far as I know, even today, there is no certificate mechanism at come, even the provisions are there, if I'm right, Article 43 or something like that. Here, that data auditor would provide a report to the data fiduciary, which probably, obviously, would indicate the compliance of the data fiduciary, right? I think I would stop here. This is what I had applied my mind with respect to some of the key areas of wherein the mapping done. So to summarize from my side, of course, we have more clarity on many of the things, as Act also clearly specified that over a period of time it would be coming in. However, some places where people interpret that it is not a very strong mechanism or something, I don't think so. And I think the data audits and the compliance part would probably come in a very big way. There are no answers to why the data score or data trust score has been removed, etc. That you and me don't know, but I'm sure that in the later stage it might be coming out. Yeah. Hello.
Ramesh, thank you very much, Ramesh.
Yeah.
You put a great effort in preparing this session, and I can see a lot of work has gone into this effort. I really appreciate it. Thank you very much for this session.
Sure. Thank you very much, Adupu sir. Thanks to Mr. Navi too. We both were discussing. In fact, I would have been more happy if he would have been there, because he would have added his comments here and there. But otherwise, yes, thank you very much. Yeah.
Ramesh, just imagine,
Yeah.
from my banking experience,
Yes, sir.
we have some special category of people called Vardanishi women.
Right.
In our rural Tamil Nadu, I saw when I was in the banking, the woman will come to Parda and will not be able to identify. So there we have a problem. And we have blind people.
Yeah.
And we have illiterates. These are the people categories, in the rural and semi-urban areas, all organizations, particularly banks and other institutions, they are going to face a big challenge.
Yeah.
From this law compliance part, it is going to be a big challenge for all the organizations who are dealing with such a category of the principles.
Hello.
Yes, sir.
I missing Manju. Did you get what Mr. Adupu is saying? There were some.
No, I couldn't get that.
Right.
Ramesh, what I'm saying is.
Yes, sir.
In our rural and tribal areas.
Yes, sir.
We have people illiterates.
Absolutely.
And, in our society, we have people with blind, and we have people with Pardanishi women.
Right.
Those who practice burqa system.
Right.
In these cases, compliance with this law and consent agreement a big challenge for the institutions.
Right. I got it.
Well, from my banking experience.
I think that's what I said somewhere, if I'm right, that it's going to be a kind of huge challenge for us. From not only, as we all know, right, the culture plays a vital role, right? I'm not trying to say anything negative because it's our law, it's our country. But as a culture, are we kind of privacy oriented, or are we a kind of system oriented? So these are all going to be a kind of game changers. Coming days, it will be very, very interesting to see. Yeah.
No, the present DPDPA, whatever passed by our parliament, nothing short. It is very much there to start with. We are just in the beginning of the journey.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Baburaj is asking me a question. What are the priority actions to start working on a typical IT company HR department in light of DPDPA? Be with me. First, to create the awareness. And like any law, right? Privacy law, we talk about you need to have a full control on the data, what we have. Data inventory, data mapping, data owners, right? And policies and the procedures, etc. first we need to have that applicability to my organization. What kind of systems and processes I need to bring in. I had the kind of one slide where to start, but because of the time we will. Baburaj, I think now, in my opinion, again, if you have a kind of controls already implemented, for example, 27001, 27701, any management system for that matter, or DPCMS, what we talk about, obviously we have a place to start, right?
Yeah. Ramesh ji, thanks for the insight. Only thing, see, the problem here is the awareness about these new laws and stuff like that, right? Even the HR head also is least bothered, basically.
Yeah.
But it's very hard to convince him also. So that's where we got an organization challenge here, Ramesh. But definitely we have a framework in place. We have the DPIA also acting. That is more on the delivery side, Ramesh.
Right.
Yeah. We have to start on the internal processes. So that's where. Do we have some material, or can you help me on some sort of content or the guidance, no? Or how to start on this internal process?
I would request you, Navi sir is not there, but on his behalf, please have a look at the DPCMS.
In fact,
DPCMS. Okay.
Yeah, Manju?
Navi sir is there on the call now.
Oh, very good.
Traveling, but I think
he's traveling.
So, Baburaj, I would say, believe me, that would be the guide. In fact, we had worked on it probably 2 years back, which is addressing the elements like our 27001 to 27701 to GDPR, whatnot. And in fact, I'm supposed to work with Navi sir on updating that. So I would say, please take that as the base and start looking at the control.
Ramesh, I can also support that based on my experience, lessons learned, right? I can also help you out in update if you can share that info with me.
Yes. We will discuss it. I would suggest to be with Navi sir and all the four. Believe me, we will get somewhere. Yesterday, I will tell you, I don't know whether I'm sure most of you would have heard about it. When we talk about, let's say that applicability, it says that it is for a digital personal data, simple. Number two, even let's say that if there is a non-digital in the manual form, it is getting subsequently digitalized, then it becomes a digital personal data and it is applicable.
Correct.
But we need to be careful about that form, which is that the source. So we need to be careful because even that is a breach, it's a breach. Yesterday, I was just going through some blog. So these are all the minor interpretations. People like Mr. Navi, Dr. Limmaye, from legal perspective, they'll be able to help us.
Okay, perfect. I will do that. Yeah, I'll go through the document and probably
I can
work out on another update also. I can help you. Yep.
Excellent. Thank you. And in fact, I remember now, thanks, Baburaj, you were also part of that initial discussions on the DPCMS.
I was there.
Yeah,
but I got disconnected for a couple of months.
Yeah, we will.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Great. And I hope at least we set I was able to set the context that what is DPDPA, because we discussed in multiple forums, right? That my idea was, that's why I had not gone through the Indian slide deck. Maybe in some other forum, we will discuss it as applicable. I'll discuss Navi and Manju. But I'm sure that we have got some kind of idea that how beautifully the mapping is being done. Yeah. Thanks all of you for your patience hearing. Hope the discussions had kind of throw some light. Thank you very much. Yeah, Manju, over to you.
Excellent.
Thank you, Mr. Ramesh.
Yeah.
No, just saying thank you very much. I think the clarity and the smoothness of the transition and explanation was just elegantly put. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Kamal sir. Thank you. Thanks for joining. Happy to have you.